Hello all, and welcome to Lesson 2 of the RYA Start Racing course. This disembodied voice is Mark McClelland, race coach here at Fish Row Yacht Club. In this lesson, I aim to cover the basic rules you need to start racing at Fish Row, and to start to look at some tactics. Now, this lesson is designed to be accessible to complete beginners, but also to hold some interest for sailors who are already racing. Due to the current coronavirus crisis, we aren't able to meet up or to go sailing, so I've decided to provide this lesson as a video. I've homeschooled myself on how to do it. Hopefully it goes well. This has the added advantage that you can revisit this lesson as your knowledge of sailing increases and hopefully get something different from the video each time. The drawback is I cannot take your questions during the lesson, and this is normally an important part of every lesson. So what I'd like you to do, if you have questions, is to email them to me or comment in the comments below this video, and I'll do my best to answer them for you and perhaps even incorporate your questions into later versions of this video. There are no silly questions. Get in touch, please. So let's get started. The rules of sailing. World Sailing publishes the racing rules of sailing. They are updated for each Olympic cycle, so they tend to last for 4 years. You can get a quick reference book, but we've all got phones these days, you can simply view the rules online at this link. Now, they can look scary. Don't be afraid of that. A lot of it is just reference at the start, and also it covers a lot more than just basic sailing. It covers windsurfing, kite surfing, remote control racing, powerboat racing, all this sort of stuff. So don't think you have to read all of it. And I'm going to pick out the easiest rules, the ones that we're most interested in having you know. The basic rules. Safety is paramount, right? All boats must give all possible help to a person or vessel in danger. Whenever you're sailing dinghies, you can assume that the safety boat will attend the capsizes, but you should also keep an eye on your fellow sailors and make sure they're safe and visible if you're near them. Make sure that the right number of people have popped up after a capsize. Just make sure that they're okay. Of course, if you're out in the Forth on a yacht race or even further afield and someone falls overboard, this is a much more dangerous situation. And as soon as you hear that mayday on the radio or see it happen, racing is off, and you should proceed with all speed to help recover the swimmer. When my mast came down on the yacht 2 seasons ago, David Wilkie paused racing to make sure that we were all okay and the situation was in hand. He came up and shouted across, made sure everyone was there. Once he was happy, he continued racing, and the race committee took some time off as a result to reflect this. That was the right thing to do. I've also put in here, avoid collision. Now, no matter whether you're in the right or wrong, and we'll look at the rules just now, even if the rules are in your favour, you must take all measures to avoid collision. That's to keep people safe. The next basic rule, Rule 2, good sportsmanship. The sport relies on its competitors to act in a fair and sporting manner, otherwise it would all descend into chaos. So if you make a mistake and hit a buoy, and even if no one sees you, you're out on your own on one side of the course, you're still expected to take your penalty fairly. That's all that really means. But it's important, and it's so important that they put it as Rule 2. So now we need some rules for situations you find yourself in on the race course. When 2 boats meet, you need to know who's got the right of way and who has to stay clear. It's just like if you're going in the car somewhere. You come to a crossroads, and there's rules, or there's traffic lights. One side gets a green light, the other side gets a red light. The first one is Rule 10. When boats are on opposite tacks, the boat on port tack must keep clear of a boat on starboard tack. Now that begs the question, when are you on starboard tack and when are you on port tack? Now I'm going to look at a video now, which will hopefully explain this a bit better.
Any point of sailing where the wind is on the left-hand side of the boat is called port tack and is the give-way tack and is marked in red. Any point of sailing where the wind is on the right-hand side of the boat is called starboard tack, which is the stand-on tack marked in green. You must familiarise yourself with what point of sailing and what tack you're on at all times, as this has a direct bearing on whether you are the give-way vessel or not. If you're the boat on starboard, you can alert your position to oncoming traffic by shouting loudly, "Starboard!" But you must be prepared to take avoiding action if the boat on port does not respond. Let's take a look at some practical examples. Here, both boats are on close haul point of sailing. The boat in red is on port tack and is the give-way vessel. The green boat is on starboard and is the stand-on vessel. The red boat must avoid the green boat by either steering behind the starboard boat or tacking onto starboard tack to match the green boat and sail alongside it. The same rule applies if you're sailing with the wind behind you. Once again, the boat in red is on port, so should avoid the boat in green, which is sailing on starboard. The red boat has the choice of turning behind the green boat or jibing onto starboard to sail alongside the green boat. Let's now look at when a close-hauled boat meets a boat sailing away from the wind. The red boat is close-hauled, but sailing on port, so should avoid the green boat that is on a dead run on starboard. As before, the red boat must keep out of the way by either tacking out of the way like this or turning to steer behind the green boat. Let's look at this in reverse. Here, it's the boat that's sailing away from the wind that is on port tack, marked in red, and the other boat sailing close-hauled is on starboard. Once again, the red boat must avoid the green boat by either steering behind it or turning onto the opposite jibe to sail clear.
When a boat's on starboard tack, it has right of way over boats on port tack. But this does not give the boat on starboard tack a golden ticket to hunt down boats in port. You might be the right of way boat, but you're also termed the stand-on boat, which means that you should maintain a steady course and speed, thus giving the port boats a chance to avoid you. Rule 11. On the same tack and overlapped. When boats are on the same tack and overlapped, a windward boat shall keep clear of a leeward boat. So if you've got two boats on starboard or port, the one that's closer to the wind has to keep clear of the one that's further away from the wind. Now this counts whether the boats are on the same leg, or maybe one of the boats is turned round a mark and is coming down a different leg, or it even counts if the boats are in different races on the same day. Let's watch a video again.
Here we see two boats sailing on port. In this situation, it's the boat that has the wind behind it sailing down the screen that's the give-way vessel, so must take avoiding action, and steers behind the close-hauled boat to keep clear. Now, let's look at what happens when overtaking. Here, the overtaking boat must keep clear at all times by either sailing well to the windward side or by turning underneath and sailing well to the leeward side. Let's look at boats on converging courses. In this situation, it's the boat that's on the windward side that's the give-way vessel and must adjust its course to avoid a collision, or steer behind the other vessel. The rules we've just illustrated are the most common and most basic. Please be aware that other situations do exist, and if in doubt, keep clear of other vessels to avoid collisions well in advance.
Throughout all of these rules, if you'll remember, boats have to avoid collision. And if there's a change of situation or course, you must try and give the keep clear boat ample time and opportunity to actually keep clear. This is not a ramming speed vibe here. Loud hail your intention, indicate what you wish them to do. So, there's two boats, one just behind me, and I'm about to tack on the starboard, and I know that I'm about to then have right of way over this boat, and we're going to be in a collision situation. I would shout, tacking, loudly and clearly towards the other boat, so that they now know that I'm going to tack onto starboard, and it's better for them to make their decision what they're going to do now, either slow down to go behind me or tack early. Also, if a boat was trying to pass me to windward, and a windward boat keep clear, for example, rule 11, and I was going to luff the boat, which means I was going to sail closer and closer to the wind to make it hard for him to pass me, I shouldn't just make a sudden, sharp move into the side of him. I would shout, windward boat, keep clear, and then slowly start luffing up, changing direction, giving him the chance to keep clear, yeah? Otherwise, I'll be in trouble for causing a collision. Right, the last one of the basic rules, and probably the most complicated one, is mark room. So you'll see at this diagram, Imagine a circular zone around each mark, and this zone is 3 boat lengths in radius. You can see there's 3 boats end to end from the mark to the edge of this zone. Now, you need to take a snapshot in your mind as each approaching boat hits that zone. As the very first part of that boat hits that imaginary zone, that's when this rule starts to apply. And the rule says, if a boat is overlapped with another boat at this point, and not before or afterwards, just at this point, then the inside boat has the right to go around the mark unimpeded. And this supersedes the other rules already discussed while the boats are within this zone. So it doesn't matter if you're in port, starboard, or whatever, this Rule 18 is the one that matters going around the mark in this zone. So here's a diagram. We've got 2 questions to answer. Which is the inside boat and what do you mean by overlapped? Well, first of all, who is the inside boat? Well, it depends on which way you're turning around the mark. We are turning to the right here. We're going to leave the mark to starboard. And the boats at the bottom of the screen, B and C, therefore, are the inside boats compared to the top boat. I find it easy to imagine 2 Formula 1 racing cars going around a bend. If they're turning right, it's obvious. You can see the road. You know which one's the inside one. Look at the same deal here. The one on the inside has the right to turn the corner without the outer one making contact. And you wouldn't expect a car that is behind another just to run up and smash into the car that's turning the corner. You know, that would obviously be in the wrong. So if they're behind each other, you don't need a rule. It's only whenever they both arrive roughly the same time at the corner that we have to decide who's the inside boat and if the rule applies. Are they overlapped? So I hope that explains who the inside boat is. The next question we need to answer for Rule 18 is what is an overlap? So here we have a situation. All 3 boats are approaching on starboard and we are turning right around the mark, leaving it to starboard. So the boats at the bottom of the diagram are the inside boats. Boat B is the first boat to hit the 3 boat length zone. And this is when we take the snapshot. If we draw this blue dotted line along its stern, we can see that the boat to the inside of it, boat C, does not have any part of its boat in front of the line, and so has no overlap. Thus, boat C is not allowed to take a route inside boat B at the mark and must keep clear. Now what boat B should do at this point is clearly shout, "No water at the mark," to boat C, and that indicates that he is not going to be giving him any space. If we look at the other boat on the other side, boat A, if we draw a red dotted line along the back of boat A's stern, we can see that boat B is ahead of this line. So boat B is overlapped on A and is the inside boat. Rule 18 does apply to boat B. Boat A must give boat B room to go around the mark. Boat A should sail wider. Let's move it on for 2 seconds later. And now we're just looking at boats A and C. What's the situation between them? Have a wee think. Boat A is now hit the zone. If we draw the red dotted line across its stern again, you can see that boat C is overlapped on the inside of boat A because it's got part of its boat ahead of that line. It doesn't have to be all of the boat, it just has to be any part of its boat. Boat C is also the inside boat. So boat C has fulfilled both requirements. It is the inside boat and it is overlapped with boat A. As you can see, boat C hasn't hit the zone yet, but boat A has, so that triggers this rule. So boat C should call for water at the mark, and boat A should make room for C to go around the mark. Now, the clearer sighted of you might have realised that because of boat A's angle, it is allowing boat C to be overlapped with it. If boat A was coming in at B's angle, there would be no overlap. So there is an opportunity to maybe steer a sneaky course to ensure that you break the overlap before entering the zone. So what if it's close? What if you're not sure? You're not sure if you got the overlap or you broke it? Well, the rules say if we assume that the situation that existed just prior to the 3 boat length zone didn't change in that case. So you've been overlapped for the last 5 minutes and you think, oh, glory me, just in the last 2 seconds I've broken the overlap. It's going to be very, very difficult to prove, and the rules will assume that you probably didn't. Now this rule has lots of exceptions. Most we're going to skip from now, but the main one is at the windward mark. The leeward mark, it didn't matter if you were in port or starboard, this rule took precedence. Well, at the windward mark, it doesn't take precedence over port and starboard. You cannot claim water at the mark if you're coming in on windward to port. Here, boat B is approaching on port tack, so I've made him red. Boats A and C are on starboard, so I've made them green. Now you could argue, drawing the line, that boat B is inside, because we're turning left, is the inside boat and overlap with boat A. However, because boat B needs to tack in order to go around the mark, it cannot claim mark room. So I'm going to go into this slightly further for the more advanced sailors. Don't worry if I'm losing you, beginners, but you can come back to this video and think about it a bit further. What boat B is attempting here is a high-risk manoeuvre. It's coming in on port. Boats A and C are lined up nicely on the starboard lay line and ready to just bear away and go around the mark. Now the rules want to discourage this last-minute port tack approach. Boat B can really cause carnage here at the mark. So they don't allow Rule 18 to apply here. Now normally, once you complete your tack onto starboard, you have full rights and can claim mark room. So if we imagine that boat C here has come in port and then just tacked onto starboard, once he's completed his tack, he's got total rights and he can claim mark room. Now he's slightly ahead of the line across the stern of A, so he's on the inside and he is overlapped, so he can claim mark room and he can expect boat A to keep clear. Now, if you're thinking about the other rules, this is slightly academic anyway, as boat A is to windward. The wind is coming from up here. And he's on the same tack as C, so boat A has to keep clear anyway, so it doesn't really change the rules, but boat C's come in on tack, and once it's tacked, he gets full rights. The rules don't want boat B doing this, so there's a double whammy here. And the rules will penalise boat B, because if you tack onto starboard within this zone, you don't get any rights once you're on starboard. You can't luff another boat, and if you cause any other boat to deviate their course to avoid you, even if they weren't overlapped, say C's coming in well behind B, B tacks and C has to go round it, you've actually committed a foul. So only come in at the last minute and pull this cowboy move if you're sure you're going to get away with it. So the first bit of tactics we can look at, it's a good time to look at it now. Conclusion from Rule 18. Getting the inside track at the upcoming mark is a great way to overtake, because you're going to have the right of way at the mark. So that's something to think about, especially as you're going downwind. The second thing is what we've just been talking about. Approaching the windward mark on the port lay line is extremely dicey if there's going to be any sort of traffic at the mark. If you're winning, do whatever you want. If there's not going to be any traffic, fine. But if you're coming into a group, you are going to have to avoid everyone there. And so what do you do if you're the outside boat at the leeward mark? Well, the best move in a two-boat situation is to actually slow down a wee bit, sail wide, and then take the racing line into the mark. So like a Formula 1 racing car again, wide entry, so you go out to the wide side of the road and then you turn tightly so that you're exiting right beside the mark. And throughout this nice wide turn, instead of trying to spin the boat on the spot, you're going to generate more speed and probably get inside the other boat.
Upwind again. So you have to make sure your trim lines are set correctly for sailing upwind. If you have all the time in the world, then you can easily make a wide turn, and actually your goal is to be sailing upwind right next to the mark. If you want to be sailing upwind right next to the downwind mark, it's pretty important that you have some room between you and the mark before starting your rounding. You can see there are almost 2 boat lengths in between Roelof and the mark, and right as he's rounding the mark, there's no room at all.
Right, so that's the end of the rules bit. Those are the only rules that we need you to know at this point. You'll be able to sail for a couple of years just on this bit of knowledge. Everything else is just really exceptions to this rule. And you learn them best by getting into the situations and finding out later. But what happens if you break a rule? What have you done, man? If you fouled another boat, so in a port starboard situation, maybe you were on port and you caused the starboard boat to move out of its way to avoid the collision with you, you have to take 2 penalty turns. That's a 720-degree turn. So that's a tack, then a jibe, tack, then a jibe, or jibe, tack. Anyway, two whole circles. That's just to slow you down, and that's your penalty, for infringing upon a rule. Now, if you hit a mark, it's not quite as serious, because you haven't actually slowed another boat down. You've just made a mistake. So you only have to do one penalty turn, a 360, a tack and a jibe, and then you can continue on your merry way. Now, once you take your penalty turns, you're absolved of all sin. You've cleared your sheet. But if you think you're in the right, you should sail on and take it to a protest committee. Now, this sounds a lot worse than it actually is, because we've got 3 levels of protest with 3 different levels of jeopardy. And the first one is only ever going to apply to greenhorns and beginner sailors. And basically, we want you to learn. We want you to please come in and talk about situations that occurred. And if you're not sure who was in the right or was in the wrong or whatever, this is standard at FYC. This is what we want you to do. And hopefully we can get the whole fleet involved and have a discussion about it. So there's no penalty, just for learning. Come in, talk about it. And you go, right, fair enough. I know next time. Now, maybe if you're silver horns and up, if you're longhorns, doesn't really matter. You can still just take this level of penalty if you're not sure. We're just going to have a talk about it and find out for later. That's fine. But if you feel that you've been hard done by, well, maybe you can take it to the second level, which is a 20% extra point penalty of the number of boats in the race. I think the minimum you can get added on is 2. So if you come first in a race, but you've foiled someone else, you take it to a chat afterwards. Both boats have agreed to this level. And it turns out, yes, you were in the wrong and you didn't take your turns to exonerate yourself. Well, then instead of coming first, maybe you'll come third instead. The last level is, as I've said, full on judge duty. The loser is disqualified from the race if you're found to be in the wrong. Now, both boats, that's if both boats can't agree to take a lesser outcomes. Now, that's something that you might find at a big regatta somewhere or a championship. And it'd be quite common. Now, you shouldn't be afraid to protest because it's part of the rules and it's the only way some people learn. You shouldn't feel bad about it. And it's a better route than allowing some bad feeling to start festering. If you think someone's you're hard done by someone several times, it's better just to clear the air and take level 1 or level 2 and sort it out. Now, you can be smart. If you're in a big championship, you can take your turns and still protest. So if you thought it was 50-50, you're pretty sure that you're okay, but what you could do is you could take your turns and take it to a protest and say, I want a level 2 protest against Mark because he did this, that, the other. But I've already taken my turns, so I won't be getting any penalty if it turns out I was in the wrong. Well, that's maybe the best way to do it. When do you need to take your turns? You need to take your turns as soon as possible after the incident. But this doesn't necessarily mean straight away. If you're in a pack of boats and you're in the way, it'd be better to work your way out to the side and do them there. Likewise, if there's a massive gust sweeping through the course and you're holding on for dear life, probably not a good time to try and tack, jibe. Just keep sailing, hold on until it calms down, and then throw your turns in at the end.
Turning is one of the very important things you can do. Hopefully during a race you're not going to have to do a 720, but it's worth practicing so that you can do one quickly when you need to. That means turning in the smallest amount of space possible, which means aggressive sheeting and steering. Remember, you need to do 2 tacks and 2 jibes. Here we can see 720 and slightly more wind. The body movements now need to be very, very quick to keep the boat quite flat so you can turn efficiently. You need to let sheet out to help the bear away and then rapidly bringing it in to help you do the tack. Where possible, keep the amount of slack sheet to a minimum and hike hard for all the bear aways.
Right, so what should you do if someone follows me? Here's 3 options. Let me see, what do you think? Should you loudly shout protest? Should you point and glare menacingly at the offending skipper? Or should you slowly draw your thumb across your throat while grinning wildly? Now, I have to admit, I've seen all of these happen in the yacht fleet, not naming any names. And I'm probably a proponent of going for all 3. But yeah, what you should do is shout loudly protest, because you're giving the other the boat a chance to do its turns and realise it's done something wrong. Maybe he doesn't even think about it. But you go, no, you cut me up there. I'm protesting you. And they go, oh, God, I probably did actually. Hold on, I'll go and do my turns, thanks. If you don't shout protest, it doesn't count. If you don't give them the chance to exonerate themselves, you can't really surprise them with it later on. So tactics. This is the bit you've all been waiting for. Tactics. Now, at this point, I'd be asking for any questions. You'd be like, Mark, oh my God, this is so complicated. Just tell me what to do to stay out of trouble. So I just want to get started racing. I'll worry about the rest later on. Okay, fair enough. Let's do that. These are the basic tactics. Keep you out of trouble. Go fast. And as we go further through this, it gets more and more complicated. So take as much as you can. Our main concern is clear air. Boats are not fast in turbulent air. The turbulent air would be disrupted by the boats upwind of us. So our main concern around the racecourse is to be in clean air and avoid other competitors' dirt. Now, you want to plan your journey around the racecourse to keep in lanes of clean air. Consider when you tack whether you see a free lane to sail up in clean air. So like a lane on the motorway, a lane on the road, a lane on the racecourse. If that lane is close by another boat, tack away and find another one. Try not to sail in dirty air ever. That's rule number one. If you do just that, you'll be keeping your boat speed up. You'll be doing pretty well. Now, the wind shadow going downwind and reaching is obvious. It's just a big balloon that comes down from your sail, heading straight downwind. But upwind is slightly more complicated. It's got an extra element, and it's called the lee bow.
Who's got the most boring voice?
What?
Of the lot of us, who's got the most boring voice?
That'll be me, Ted.
Listen to me.
I have an awful dreary, monotonous voice, God help me.
Yes.
First, there is the direct wind shadow of the sails. We can call this the blanket zone. It's directly downwind of the sail, so it extends to leeward and behind the boat. If you've ever tried to sail through another boat's wind shadow or blanket zone from behind, you know you have to be several boat lengths away to have a chance. Next, there is the backwind zone, which is caused by the acceleration and deflection of the wind by the sails. This is very messy air with all sorts of vortexes swirling off the leach of the sail. Some sailors don't realize that the blanket zone extends a good distance to windward of the boat as well as behind. Another thing to note is that the sails deflect the wind from its original direction. So, a boat on the same tack in the backwind zone will experience a header. This is why it's so difficult to hang with a boat on your leeward bow.
They aim directly at the bow of the other boat, starting a slow and deliberate tack that completes with inside one boat length of the windward boat. The windward boat luffs to try and break out of the lee bow wind shadow. Sadly for them, this only serves to slow them down, allowing GTR to slowly climb to windward, putting more of the lee bow wind shadow onto the windward boat. Eventually, the speed differential allows GTR to break clear ahead, racing out to the starboard ley line. At the point we tacked, we were around about 4 minutes 30 from the top mark. It's amazing in these light conditions how a 30-second gap could be stretched out within such a small period of racing. As the wind bends around the sail and creates a virtual header for the windward boat, you can visibly see the speed differential as the windward boat falls further into the wind shadow created by GTR, which is now clear ahead. As we fast forward on the approach to the top mark, you'll see that the windward boat continues to fall backwards as GTR prepares a tack to approach the top mark. At this point, you'll see the real benefit of the maneuver. Pushing them backwards, you'll see in the background that the chasing boat is now lee-bowed from a second craft coming into the ley line. This doubles the advantage DTR had, as it slows them further on the approach to the top mark. GTR rounds the top mark in clear air, getting the chute set and allowable to draw away downwind, while the two boats behind fight it out, coming into the top mark.
Next bit of tactics is the start. Now, this is probably one of the scariest things for new sailors, but it's quite simple. And we don't have a very busy start line at Fisher, so it's a great place to start. So requirements of a good start. Number one, let's go back to clear air. You need to be in clear air, so you need to be at the line when the gun goes. I've got a watch that counts down 3, 2, 1, go in terms of minutes, and so I know roughly when to be at the front line. A great tip is to be about 2 boat lengths back from the start line with 5 seconds to go, and hopefully travelling forwards, and go for it. Now, if you don't get in the front line whenever the gun goes, you're going to be probably dealing with bad air, and you're going to have to do a little bit of nip and tuck, weave, tacking until you establish clean air. But try and do that as soon as possible. The next top tip is be on starboard. Starting on port is for pros and total gamblers. Now, here's a video of a laser start from the Olympics. And if all the world's best laser sailors start on starboard, maybe you should think about doing so too.
You can see small fleet, 10 boats. There's the start line between the 2 boats. Quantities holding Slingsby up. We've got 45 to go before the start as we come in for the laser for men race. These boats are identical, supplied equipment. Oh, look at Slingsby, is controlling there, the windward boat required to keep clear. So it's actually Slingsby at the moment that is the aggression at the back as Contides comes around and tacks in the windward. Slingsby comes in underneath. 20 seconds to go and the match race is on between first and second. It's Slingsby currently in first as Slingsby's just pushing, very aggressive. Back comes Contides coming up here. 6 seconds to go. They won't want to be over the line. They look comfortably behind too. And at the gun, another clean start. And it is Goodison from GBR midline as they head off up to the first mark. And Costa from Uruguay got a nice start. Murdoch in there. And we saw that Contides had to tack away immediately. First advantage there to Slingsby. Slingsby immediately.
Okay, so we've started. We're on the first beat. So what do we do now? Should I tack? Should I follow people? Should I? Which way should I go? What's going on here? What are my tactics, Mark? Right. Don't worry. I've got you sorted. Tacking slows the boat down. So you need a good reason to tack. It might be, if you're well practiced, it might be only by a couple of boat lengths. But if you're in a yacht or a catamaran, the tack would be much slower. So you need a much bigger reason to tack. So here's your 3 reasons for tacking. Your main 3 reasons for beginners to tack. You need to get into clear air. We've talked about that, but I can't stress it enough. Always sail in clear air. 2, at some point you're going to have to tack to reach the mark. You'll have reached what we call the ley line, the optimal line you turn on in order to make the mark. You sail past the ley line, you're sailing extra distance. You don't want to do that. And 3, to avoid traffic. If you see boats coming up, you go, I don't really want to go in there. There's going to be lots of dirty air up there, or don't know about the rules. Just avoid it. Keep out on your own. Keep in fresh air. So, as I said, with tacking, it depends on how well practiced you are as to the reasons that you can take to tack. So it's a good reason to practice your tacks. Get out there, get faster at them, get the boat up to full speed as soon as possible afterwards, and then you can start picking smaller advantages to tack upon. One of the reasons I have with the America's Cup these days, especially the foiling catamarans that were going at 50 miles per hour, is all those tactics were ruled out of it because it took them so long to tack compared to travelling at, sub-light speed, that they just didn't. They'd go to the edge of the course, tack, go to the edge of the course, tack, and that was it. It's just so different from how the rest of the world, the majority of the world sails, that I just don't really get it. I find the Olympic dinghy much more compelling viewing, and there's so many good videos. You can watch the reruns of every single race, the medal races, and with the helicopters and GPS tracking and drone videos, the quality is brilliant and you can really understand what's going on. So I'd really recommend, if you're bored, if you're stuck inside the house, as you might be at the minute, looking up some of these videos and looking through them, and you'll actually, okay, at first you won't get what they're trying to say, but hopefully with the aid of this video, you'll start to understand it a bit more. Now, more advanced tactics. This is for your second or third viewings of this, and to bring in something for our more advanced sailors. For a greenhorn and beginner racers, the first 3 reasons to tack are plenty to think about. Right, so anyone will do well if you just remember to keep in clear air and tack as little as possible. But as you grow into your racing and you get better at tacking, you can start to consider additional factors. Wind shifts, wind pressure, tide, course layout. So let's look at wind shifts first. From our prevailing wind direction, that is the direction we can expect to sail under more than any other, this is southwesterly. So the wind will therefore come over the land, and come over the land for a long way. It'll come round Arthur's Seat in the city of Edinburgh, and the trees and the buildings, and it will be turbulent and shifty, especially close to the shore. Further on out into the Forth, it will start to even out a bit more once it's stopped going over the obstacles, but we're going to get lots and lots of changes of directions in a southwesterly. If the wind is coming from the north or the northeast, we actually get quite a steady wind direction because there's nothing in between us and Norway. So the wind's pretty settled. What we do get in those situations is big waves, though, as you know. So when the wind moves from its average, it will benefit some boats and disadvantage others. So I've got a video here from Online Sailing Coach. And this guy seems to know what he's talking about. I like this video. And I don't think it got his British Sailing Squad fleece on eBay.
So let's kick things off by talking about oscillating shifts. So here we see a course with the start line at the bottom and the windward mark at the top. So when a race officer lays this course, they do so expecting all the wind to be shooting down the course in one direction. So if the wind is flowing directly down the course, we should have a no-go zone here, and whichever side of the no-go zone you pick, you should make the first mark at roughly the same time. But the wind across the course is not consistent. It can vary a lot in direction. So as you sail up the course, you'll notice wind will change its angle many times, and with each change, the no-go zone will shift, and with it your close-hauled sailing angle. So here the wind is in a neutral position with both boats able to sail the same angle to the mark. But say for example there is a shift to the left. The no-go zone shifts with the wind, and if the starboard tack pink boat keeps sailing the same angle to the old wind, they will find themselves in the no-go zone. They're sailing too close to the new wind and will have to bear off in order to get to their new close-hauled sailing angle. By contrast, the turquoise boat will be on a beam reach as a result of the left shift, and the wind will be coming over perpendicular to their boat. So the turquoise boat can head up and is now sailing 45 degrees to the new wind, whereas the pink boat is forced to bear away, and if both boats sail on, the turquoise boat is going to get to the mark much sooner than the pink boat. But if you are the turquoise boat, you have to head closer to the wind in order to take advantage of your gain. Some of the younger sailors I coach get a beneficial shift, but aren't always paying attention, so they just keep sailing the same way as they were before the wind shift and don't take advantage of it. So it's really important to keep an eye out for those shifts and react to them when they come in. So if the wind shifts left, this is always going to be beneficial for the port tack boat, the turquoise boat in this example, and a beneficial shift is what we call a lift. And a detrimental shift, on the other hand, is one that forces us to sail further, and we call those headers. In the diagram, the starboard tack pink boat is in a header. If the wind had shifted right instead of left, then the mirror image of this would happen. The pink boat would become the advantaged lifted boat and would be able to point closer to the mark, and conversely the port tack turquoise boat would become headed. So remember this, headers and lifts are the same thing, it just depends on what tack you are on. If it's a left shift, it will be a lift for a port tack boat and a header for a starboard tack boat, whereas a right shift is a header for a port tack boat and a lift for a starboard tack boat. So lifts are good and headers are bad. So just to reinforce this, if we draw some ladder rungs square to the mark, we can see that in this left shift, the port tack pink boat is going to pass up the ladder rungs much quicker than the turquoise boat, who is almost being forced to sail across the ladder rungs, not making much progress towards the mark. So in a left shift, the port tack is favoured and vice versa. In a right shift, starboard tack is favoured. So shifts are actually really helpful as we can use them to sail less distance. Here we see the huge gains that could be made from noticing the correct shifts and the huge losses from not noticing. So here we have two shifts. We have a right shift at the start of our beat, and later on we have a left shift. And the turquoise boat gets them both right, and the pink boat gets them both wrong. So the turquoise boat is actually sailing a lot less distance just from picking the right shifts. If the wind shifts more than once during a beat, we're facing what's called oscillating shifts. So oscillating shifts shift one way, then the other, and keep swinging between 2 points. This allows you to make big gains because you can climb those ladder rungs quicker and get to the mark much quicker than if the wind hadn't shifted. So as oscillating shifts are so important, we need to know the following rule. Avoid the ley lines. Ley lines are the green lines in this diagram. They are invisible lines that mark the first point that when reached you can tack and make it to the mark. You don't need to sail any further in that direction once you've reached the ley line. They are determined by your close haul sailing angles. When the wind shifts, the ley lines will also change. So why should we avoid the ley lines? Obviously we have to get to the ley lines eventually in order to get round the mark, but you should aim to get to them as late as possible. If you get to the ley lines too early, like the pink boat has, any shift is going to be negative. If the wind shifts right, then the ley lines change, so the pink boat will have sailed further than they needed to. Conversely, the turquoise boat in the centre of the course hasn't sailed that pointless extra distance, and therefore they'll make a gain on the pink boat. And if the wind was to go left, which is going to be a header for those on starboard tack, both boats will have to bear off to match that new close haul sailing angle, but because of the left shift, the boat in the middle gains again, because they are now on the ley line and can tack and sail straight towards the mark. Whereas if you are the pink boat who was on the ley line, and you could sail straight to the mark before, now you're going to have to zigzag there and therefore sail extra distance. I find it quite helpful to think of the avoid the ley line rule like this. So there's an invisible line that runs through the middle of the racecourse, which sailors call the rum line. So when sailing, imagine the rum line as if it were a magnet trying to pull you back into the centre of the course, where it is strategically safer. The rule here is that the closer you get to the edges of the course, the ley lines, the more your desire to tack should build. There may be a very good reason to go to the ley line, maybe more wind, better tide, but whatever that reason is, it has to be strong enough to override that magnet pulling you back to the centre of the course. In the diagram there are 3 zones. Red is very near the ley line, orange is quite close and yellow is slightly close. If you're in the yellow zone and heading towards a ley line, you want to tack back and head towards the run line even if the wind is square. There is no wind shift at present. Once in the orange zone, you should tack back to the run line even if you are in a slight lift. And once you're in the red zone, you should tack back even if you're in a large lift. So the point here being, the closer to those ley lines you get, the more your urge, your desire to tack should be. So you now should be clear on what effects lifts and headers have, but how do we spot a change in the wind and how do we react? So how you react is actually pretty simple. So if you get headed, you have two choices. You either bear away to the new coastal sailing angle, or you put a tack in to the new lifted tack. And if you're lifted, if you get a lift, all you do is head up to the new close-hauled sailing angle. You can usually feel wind changes because something will feel wrong. So if you get headed, your sails will start to flap, and if it's a really big header, you might even be forced to tack. If you're lifted and you don't react, you'll be sailing a reaching course with the sails pulled in their upwind position, and most sailors will be able to feel something isn't quite right there. So if things don't feel quite right, have a look up at your wind indicator and check whether there's been a wind shift. Getting a burgee or a wind indicator on the top of your mast is a really great investment because you can get an idea of what your normal sailing angle is in relation to the burgee. And when that angle changes, you know you've been headed or lifted. The best way to react and take advantage of lifts is to watch the front of your sail and keep nudging the boat as close as possible to the no-go zone without the sail starting to flap. This way you know that you're always close to the no-go zone and not missing out on any of those lifts. After a while of doing this, you should get an idea of what it feels like just before that sail is about to flap, and you can actually bear away just before that point. So those are just a few ways you can work out whether you've been lifted or headed. But often you want to know well in advance whether you're going to get a header or a lift. So I'm going to give you two ways you can do that. Firstly, pay attention to the boats ahead of you, and secondly, look out for gusts and lulls coming down the course at you, because often a change in wind strength can bring a change in direction also. Firstly, make sure you're paying attention to any boats ahead of you. If many of the boats ahead on the same tack as you have been forced to tack or bear off, that indicates there is probably a heading shift that hasn't reached you yet, so you should be ready to react to it. When you get hit by a header, you usually want to tack, because when the wind is headed on starboard tack, it will be lifted on port tack and vice versa.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that video. Let's look at wind shifts. What does a lift feel like in the boat? He was talking about lifts. Well, if you're sailing in the same direction as you were, but suddenly the boat has tilted away from you, like you're going into a gust. Now, maybe you've hit a gust, but chances are you've been lifted and you're now not sailing close to the wind, you're maybe sailing on a close reach. So you can actually turn up closer to the wind again because the wind has changed. So tighten up your sailing angle to be close in the wind again. And that's great, you're on a lift. That's what you want to be on, as long as you've got room to sail into and you're not already on the ley line. Maybe it's easier to notice when you're headed. So if you're sailing along and you're sailing in a straight line, what does a header feel like in the boat? You sail in the direction, but your bum just hit the water. You know that panic, you're going, oh, I'm going to capsize here. I'm going into to windward. The sails are flapping, I'm too close to the wind. Well, you've just been headed. If you were looking to tack anyway, that's the time to tack. Because if you're on a header and you tack, you're then on the lifted course. What this guy in his video was talking about is there's two factors to wind shifts. One is the more obvious one, which is always sailing on the lifted course and sailing the shortest course to the next mark, right? The second one is if the wind shifts to the right, the boats on the right-hand side of the course will benefit and the boats on the left-hand side will fall behind. I have to get my hands out and flip-flop them left and right to see who's going to get the advantage. To think about it, I'm not quite there yet. But there's a double whammy. So if you ended up on the right-hand side of the course and you're looking to actually get back into the centre of the course, now, if you get a right-hand wind shift, you get an advantage from the wind shift, plus you've just been headed, so you can tack onto the favoured lift and head back to where you wanted to be on the middle of the course. So whenever the big guys, tacticians, are talking about getting into phase with the wind shifts, that's what they mean. They mean being on the right side of the course to pick up a favourable wind shift in order to get them back into the middle, plus getting a bonus for being on the right-hand side of the course. Cards on the table, as I said, this is pretty advanced. Personally, I can read lifts and heads pretty well, but I cannot yet think about getting to the right-hand side of the course for that double whammy thing. I guess that's for next season. Another great way of deciding whether you're on a wind shift or not, as you start each race, I like to do a couple of practice starts, and I like to get the boat set up for going to windward, so that whenever I start the race, I'm perfectly comfortable. I've got exactly the right settings that, for that moment. So I will start through the start line several times. And as I do it, I will look at what the boat is aiming at. Is it aiming at the big white house? Is it aiming to the right of the big white house? Is it aiming to the left of the big white house? If you can go in the other way, what geographical feature in Fife am I aiming at, right? So this sort of gives you an idea of what the average wind direction is, because you've done it 3 or 4 times. Now, if you come around and you go hard on the wind, coming through the mark or coming through the line on your second time round, you look at what you're aiming at now. If you're aiming closer to the mark than you were on average, you're lifted and you want to continue on that tack. If you're aiming further away from the mark than you normally are, then you're on the headed tack. So you should tack immediately onto the other side, as long as there's clear air that way, and head to the other side of the course. And hopefully that'll get you in phase with the wind shifts. I hope that's clear. Now, I'm expecting more questions as we get further into this. But our next reason to tack, point 2, was having a look at the bigger picture. Is there more wind on one side of the course than the other? If the answer is yes, then your boat will obviously go faster with more wind. And this is very important in light wind conditions. This happens all the time in southerly wind directions at FYC, because the houses and the trees close to shore will cause a wind shadow. The wind shadow is actually 20 times the height of the house out from it. So if we're sailing close to the land, there'll be a wind shadow, turbulent air close to the shore, but further on out, the air will be cleaner and stronger. So if you identify more wind pressure on one side of the course, maybe that's where you should go there. And the boat that gets there first and sails there the longest will probably get the advantage. Now, how do you identify more wind pressure? Well, white horses. If you see more white horses on the waves further on out than in, or to the left of the course than the right of the course, that indicates more wind. Or if you're in the lighter winds, you can see the gusts in darker water, which is caused by the wind rippling. And that's where you want to get to. Sometimes you can even find a corridor to sail up and no one else has any wind. Now, polarized sunglasses help massively here because they cut out the glare from the water. So it makes it so easy to read on the wind. And I'd recommend, you can get really cheap ones. Don't have to be fancy sailing floating ones. I recommend you start wearing them. One, it protects your eyes because you get double the sun glare out there because of the water reflection. And 2, it makes it really easy to see what's going on. When to tack, point 3. Is there more tide on one side of the course? In FYC, not really. The tide comes up and down quite a bit here, but it doesn't actually go side to side much, if you allow me to talk about it like that. There is thoughts that maybe there is a very slight tidal current. You can normally see a line of detritus on the water, and that is a tidal line, and that denotes the difference between water going one way and water going the other. So often you get a back eddy of tide alongside the shore going in the opposite direction than you'd expect. So if the tide's coming in, it'll be going in the out direction and vice versa. Normally, tide is stronger in the deeper water that you get. So if you're out and you're racing across the Forth in a yacht, as soon as you make it out to, say, where the big ships go in the channel, you can expect high amounts of tide there. You can get tide atlases, and there's maps that will show you where the most tide has been recorded. If you ever go to sail out at Granton, for example, out of Royal Forth, as soon as you leave their marina, you're into really strong tide, and you really quite notice it if you're trying to get a yacht into there. Sometimes you have to really punch the engine just to stem the tidal flow, which is trying to sweep you up or down the river. And they then race in the bay, Wardy Bay beside them. So half the race course is out in the heavy flow, and half the race course is in a sheltered bay. And you really notice the difference then. If the tide's against you, it's generally a race to get in and out of the tide as soon as possible. So now we've got 3 or more factors to weigh up. Now, it's up to you, and everyone will have a different opinion probably on how important each factor is. Maybe you see more wind out there, but you know that the tide will be against you out there. Which is going to be more important? One of the solutions is just to follow the local hotshot. Work out who the best sailor is at the club that you're visiting, who won the last race, see which way they go, and think about going the same direction. One thing I'd say is if it's going to be shifty conditions, you're a lot safer up the middle of the course, because then you're not gambling. You're not going to take a big hit or get a big advantage, but you're sort of playing the odds. That is kind of everything I wanted to talk about so far. What I will do now is play you a final video which kind of sums up everything. It, like a lot of videos out on the internet, is aimed at a higher level than beginners. This is the real problem that you have, trying to find a video that doesn't bamboozle you. Hopefully the ones I've chosen are a bit more beginner friendly, and I've cut some of them up and only shown the beginner friendly bits as well. So I'd like to point out that I do not have the rights for any of these videos, and I've tried to credit the people who made them in the first place and save me a lot of time. Please go and check the videos out in their native YouTube channels and see what else these people have got to say. I'm sure that they'll be very happy at the additional views. Remember, any questions, get in touch with me. Everyone stay safe, and hopefully we'll get sailing very soon.
Now let's look at the most typical upwind situations for clear air. Of course, the biggest one is the starting line. There are several trouble spots on the starting line. The worst one is being in the second or third row, where the blanket and backwind zones result in terrible air. If you don't find an escape route to clear air, you will continuously lose ground to the boats ahead. We'll talk about the best way to escape later. Another trouble spot is being part of a pack of boats in light air, anywhere on the course. That dome of rising air and falling air we talked about in the last slide affects all the boats in a pack. This happens on the starting line, sailing upwind near a pack of upwind or downwind boats, and also at the windward mark. If you picture a dome surrounding a pack of boats, you can understand why boats in the middle of the pack, even those toward the front, see less wind than boats on the ends of the pack. This is why a start near either end of the line in light air can get you away from the pack quicker and allow you to sail freely toward the new wind. Here are some more trouble spots. In this case, the wind is shifted to the left before the start. Have you ever been in this situation? If everyone is up on the line, does everyone have clear air? If not, who does have clear air? When the wind shifts left, all the boats are headed. Every boat is in the backwind zone of the one to its left. Only one boat at the pin end is free from the backwind zone of other boats. How would you react to this situation? Would you stay on starboard tack? Have you ever noticed that the first boats to tack out of a situation like this quickly get a big lead on everyone else? Once you've made it off the starting line, if you want to be able to follow your strategy, you have to be able to hold a lane in the direction you want to go. In this situation, all the boats would like to continue on port. Who is in the best shape to be able to do that? A and B have good wide lanes. with no boats immediately to leeward and room to bear off if needed. C has clear air now, but just barely. If C doesn't sail quite as high as A, or if a small right shift occurs, C will quickly lose clear air and will have to decide whether or not to tack. D is probably in A's wind shadow or blanket zone, and even if she isn't, she would not be able to creep up on B due to B's backwind zone. We'll talk later about D's options. Another big trouble situation, especially in a big fleet, is the windward mark. Boats are all coming together, so the potential for bad air is huge. Finding the clearest air around the mark can lead to big gains. Every windward mark rounding is different, and we can't cover all the situations, but a lot of books discuss the one shown here. Which boat is likely to gain the most in this rounding? If you think about clear air, A and C are the only boats sailing in clear air. B, D, and E are in the backwind zone of the boats ahead. E and D are ahead of C, but C should be able to gain on them since C should be able to sail faster and point higher in clear air. If so, C should be able to tack on the ley line and backwind one or more of B, D, and E. If she can't do this without fouling, she can still duck and will have gained some ground, although she would lose it again if she falls in behind that pack. The point is, though, that in a situation like this, with lots of boats on starboard, coming in on port tack preserves your clear air longer. Now let's talk about ways to get or keep clear air in some of the situations we just discussed. What are the green boat's options here, and which is the best? A lot of books will tell you that tacking to port is the best option. Here are two reasons. First, remember there is a port tack lift from the backwind zone of the boats on starboard. With that lift, green would not have to sail very far on port to get to clear air. There's a great YouTube video showing this, two boats buried at the start. One continues on starboard, the other tacks to port quickly. After about a minute, the boat that tacked to port is near the lead pack, while the other boat has lost ground. That's why you see so many sailors bail out quickly onto port after a bad start, and duck the boats as necessary to get to a clear lane. If going left is a priority, it still might be better to tack to port first and find a lane, and then tack back. But if that's not workable, you'll have to try to hang with the group and stay on starboard. Don't be afraid to foot off if needed to do this. Realize that everyone is still close to the leaders at this point, at the start. So if you act quickly, you won't lose too much, but you can lose a lot of ground quickly if you wait. Now let's talk about the windward leg. Do you ever find yourself tacking and then realize you have to tack again due to the lack of clear air? The better approach is to make sure you will have a clear lane you can hold before you tack. This is usually easy in small fleets, but it gets harder and more important in bigger fleets. Here's a simple example. If yellow wants to go right, where should she tack? The answer is fairly obvious in this example. Yellow should be able to tack to leeward of blue and maintain her lane above red. Yellow gets a small lift crossing through orange and red's backwind zones. It would not be wise to tack behind orange and red. Here's another very common windward leg situation. B wants to stay on starboard and sees A coming on port. What should B do? If B doesn't say anything, A may decide she needs to tack to avoid B, even if A wants to keep going right. This would put B in bad air. B should encourage A to keep going. Too often we see the starboard boat just hailing starboard without considering the consequences. Here's another situation showing the importance of positioning. It may be hard to plan ahead for this, but when it happens, it's nice. If red and blue want to keep going on starboard, who is more likely to keep clear air? This is pretty simple. Red is safer. Blue is acting as a blocker, forcing green to either tack or duck. If green tacks, blue will be affected and red will not. Now, if someone does tack on your wind, as red has done here to blue, what are your options? You can stay put, but as we know, you're just going to keep losing ground to red. This may be okay in certain situations. Blue can tack away and then either tack back in clear air or just go left for a while if she sees an advantage to the left. A lot of sailors won't do this, but sometimes footing off works. If you can reach off a little to get enough speed to sail through red's blanket zone. Skilled sailors can enter point mode and gradually work to windward of red. You may lose a little distance, but if you see a puff to windward, you might easily make up that distance when the puff gets to you, but not to red. The choice depends on your strategy. Where is the next puff? Are you near the ley lines? What are other boats doing? If you have your head out of the boat and are thinking ahead, your decision will be easier. Every windward mark rounding in a big fleet will have different clear air challenges. Here are two situations. Would you advise green to take the same approach in both situations? With all the boats already around the mark in the top picture, green may sail into very disturbed air if she keeps going on port. It may be better for her to tack earlier in situation 1. She'll be in disturbed air on the starboard ley line, but perhaps less so than inside of a wedge of boats near the mark. In situation 2, as we saw before, green might gain more by staying on port longer and sailing in clear air, assuming she can find a hole to tack into. Of course, clear air is not your only priority. Let's look at some reasons you may want to keep going in bad air. Why might yellow choose to keep going in this pack? If you're going the right way, say to the next puff or shift, it may be best to just keep going. Finding a puff or shift is usually more important. This is especially true if your air is not too bad, maybe on a windier day, or because you're just not losing that much. Perhaps this situation won't last long and you can live in bad air for a short time while you head in the right direction. With your head out of the boat, you can look ahead and consider your options. Let's summarize. We know that upwind boats generate 3 bad air zones. The blanket zone is a direct shadow to leeward and behind the boat. The backwind zone is to windward and behind, and it causes a header for boats on the same tack. Finally, there's rising and falling air that creates a dome of weaker air around the boat. Next, we should plan ahead for typical trouble situations. On the starting line, if you're in the second row, tack away. If there's a left shift, tack away. In any packs of boats, anywhere on the course, play the edges, since there is less wind in the middle. When you're sailing upwind, get a lane wide enough to hold. And when you're approaching the windward mark, approach on port if possible. Finally, when you do end up in bad air, consider your overall strategy when choosing options. Tack away, foot, pinch, or stay put. We hope you have enjoyed this video. Visit us at sailzing.com for more.